Turning overseas, and Ukrainian officials say Russia has launched a massive attack against the nation's energy infrastructure, leaving more than 1 million homes without power. The attack caused power cuts across the country as winter approaches, including in the capital Kyiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin says it was in response to Ukraine's long-range missile strikes into Russian territory last week. He's also threatened to start hitting parts of Ukraine's capital with a new missile, one he says has destructive power comparable to some nuclear weapons.
We will use the means at our disposal against significant targets. We do not exclude the use of these missiles against the military industry facilities or the decision-making centre, including in Kyiv. Bearing in mind that Kyiv authorities continue to attempt to strike at our vital facilities, including in St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Kremlin is attempting to disrupt attempts to end the war ahead of US President-elect Donald Trump taking office. He's accused Russia of a despicable escalation, saying it's used cruise missiles with cluster munitions.
Йому закінчення цієї війни не потрібне.
He doesn't seek an end to this war. More than that, Putin wants to prevent others from ending this war. He can go on wielding his Oreshnik missile, only to thwart the efforts of President Trump, which is sure to follow his inauguration. Putin wants to escalate the situation to such an extent so that President Trump's attempts will fail.
Well, Global Affairs editor John Lyons joins me now for analysis. Hi there, John. If we can start with these attacks overnight, President Zelensky said very vile escalation of Russian terrorist tactics in reference to the attacks on the energy facilities. What's your assessment of this?
Well, Catherine, it's definitely cranking up the whole war there now, and this is the second major attack by Russia in a month on the energy infrastructure. We've seen this pattern before in previous winters, in the lead up to the winter, and of course the winter in Ukraine and Russia is really bitter, really tough. And so what the Russians appear to be doing is trying to destroy as much of Ukraine's energy infrastructure as possible to make it another miserable winter. It's bad enough in Ukraine anyway, but now there's about 1 million people, 9 different regions have been hit. So a lot of Ukraine has energy restrictions anyway. This is now blacked out energy completely for about 1 million people at least.
Do you think that we will see a similar winter to last one, or is this one going to be worse?
I think it gets increasingly worse because as time goes on, more and more of the infrastructure has been damaged or destroyed, and it's harder for the Ukrainians to repair their infrastructure given the difficulties of war anyway, given their financial circumstances and getting all the equipment in. So this will probably be the worst winter, but it could actually be the final winter of this war if Donald Trump gets into office and does what he says he would do.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about Donald Trump in just a moment. Just sticking with issues in Ukraine, there are accusations flying about around the Zaporizhzhia region from both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do you know about the conflicts that's happening there?
Well, the Ukrainian media is reporting that the Office of the Prosecutor General has claimed that Russian army soldiers shot 5 Ukrainian defenders out of 6 who were taken prisoners of war, which of course, if that's true, would be a war crime. The Ukrainian law enforcement officers have identified the particular Russian army unit they say has done this. We can't verify this claim, but certainly if the Russians have killed 5 prisoners of war in cold blood, it is clearly a war crime. Putin's
language, I want to ask you about. It seems to be strengthening, escalating. He's threatening to strike at decision-making centres in Kyiv with those interballistic range missiles. He's also been reported to have saying Russia has 10 times as many advanced missile systems than NATO does collectively. Is this bluster, or does this mark a new phase?
Always hard to tell with Vladimir Putin, is it bluster or not? He's obviously threatened nuclear attack more than once, and he hasn't yet done that, thankfully. We don't quite know with Vladimir Putin what's going on in his mind. This is all in response, his rhetoric to the Americans, Joe Biden, having given licence to the Ukrainians to use the longer range and intermediate range ATACMS, American missiles, deeper into Russia. So clearly that aggravated Vladimir Putin, and he's now saying, I can hit Kyiv, the decision makers. That's always been the case, though. When I've been to Kyiv, a lot of the military officials that you go to meet or government officials will go to a different premises each day. You go to do an interview and you don't find out where they are. They've gone to a different building. They have been ready for that sort of thing. But certainly the rhetoric is getting harder.
OK, what do you make of the timing of all of this? It's hard to ignore that this is happening a post-US election where Donald Trump will assume as leader come January.
That's right. What had become a bit of a gridlocked war, a bit of a lower level war, is now intensifying, almost like the final sort of flushes before. Both sides are expecting that Donald Trump will want to insist on trying to do a deal as the great deal maker. He has leverage over Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine because they're funding NATO. And so it looks like this is the desperate sort of final chapter where the North Korean troops have come in to help the Russians. They're trying to retake Kursk that the Ukrainians took from Russia inside Russia. And the Ukrainians took that as a bargaining chip so they can say at any negotiation, you give us back Crimea and we give you Kursk. Now, the Russians are desperately trying to get Kursk back to remove that as a bargaining chip. So, and Reuters is now reporting today that the Russian troops, ground troops, are advancing at their fastest pace in 2 years. Reuters is very reliable, and that's ominous. So it looks like the Ukrainian soldiers are in trouble.
Yeah, and the clock is ticking. John Lyons, thank you.